Range names in Excel. You can name portions of your spreadsheet instead of using cell references such as A1 to C5, for example. It's easier to select and it's more user-friendly. And you'll see while I'm demonstrating here how many times I go to this name box and take a look at the list of range names if there are any in the spreadsheet. So that's where I'm going to start. You open up any file, go to a specific sheet, and to easily tell if you have any range names in the spreadsheet, you go to the name box and click on the down arrow. And when I click on the down arrow here, you can see that no list is being revealed when I click on this down arrow. So that tells me I have no range names. I'm going to select a portion of the spreadsheet that I want to recall so that I don't have to constantly go back and reselect that same portion over and over. Firstly, I'm going to highlight B3 down to F15. And when I do that, you can see that this portion not only has number data selected, but also text data in this top row. Formulas tab on the ribbon offers up the Define Names group and, for example, Create from Selection command. I'm going to choose this one, and when I do, you can certainly see that there is one choice that has been selected for me, and that's top row. So in this top row of the selection, every one of these headings, in other words the text data, is going to become each individual range names when I follow through with OK. Returning to the name box, clicking on the down arrow, this time you're going to notice a number of range names. It's also interesting to note that any one of these names that has an underscore present is telling us that there was a space in that heading. You cannot use spaces when you are creating a range name. I'm going to select March, and you can see the range F4 to F15 has been selected. You'll also note that F3 has not been included in this selection. F3, as part of the original grouping, was only selected for its heading so that its name is now this range for F4 to F15. When I select, let's say, purchase price, you can see the same effect. C4 to C15 has been selected. Now what about rows? What about using headings that exist in rows? I'm going to work with Campbell's Soup all the way down to F15. So each one of these rows has its data selected here, and when I go back over to my Create from Selection command in the Define Names group on the Formulas tab, this time you can see left column has been selected. When I click OK and return to the name box, there are a lot more range names, and I'm going to choose Campbell's Soup, and when I do that you can certainly see B4 to F4 has been selected. So I've just shown you how you can create a number of range names at the same time, taking advantage of existing headings that become each their own range name. What about a singular range? In other words, you want to quickly define one name for one portion of your spreadsheet. I'm going to select A3 to H15. Consider this my data area. I have two choices in which to define a name for this portion of my spreadsheet. I'm not using any of the headings here because I want to call this range data area. I can return to the Formulas tab, Define Names group, and click on Define Name if I like, and then I can type in data area here, and you can see how it's referring to as an absolute value sheet 1 A3 to H15, or I like going over to the name box and clicking not on the down arrow but right inside of the name box and typing in my range name. Remember, we cannot use spaces here. So I actually like to use this way of naming my range names. So every time there is a new word, I have an uppercase first letter cap. I certainly could put an underscore to represent a space in between data area, but this is my preferred way of creating that same sort of look. I press enter, and you can see how the name box now indicates data area as this range. Returning here to the down arrow, I can choose Heinz just to remind myself this is the range for Heinz. And then when I return back here and I choose data area, it highlights the entire portion here. Suppose I want to create a range name for a blank portion of my spreadsheet. I do that often because I want to perhaps return to a certain portion of my spreadsheet that I wish to edit, enter, or format data. I can go even to sheet number 3, highlight this portion here, call it, let's say, test area, return by pressing enter, and then when I go to this drop down here and choose data area, for example, it takes me back to sheet 1, return to test area, and it takes me to sheet 3. I love this feature in that it is so quick to select a certain portion of my spreadsheet. I call it kind of like a bookmark. Now what if you want to manage your range names? You want to delete, you want to edit. You can't delete any of your range names here in the name box. You must go to the name manager in the define names group. When I click, you'll see it takes me to the dialog box called name manager. Any one of these selections here I can edit or I can delete. I could also create a new range name through the name manager if I wish. So if I want to delete one of these range names like data area, I simply highlight, choose delete, and it asks me, do I want to? I click OK, and it is removed. I'm going to close here and return back to my spreadsheet, and when I click here, you'll notice in that name box drop down, no more data area. When I return to sheet 1, for example, you'll note that there are some formulas here in the column H, and there are some formulas here in initial cost. But suppose I actually want to create a total for January, for example. We now know that January is really referred to here as D4 to D15, and when I click on that range name, it highlights it for me. Watch what happens when I create a formula now using that range name. So when I click on auto sum, for example, you can see that January comes up instead of the D4 to D15 range. The important thing to note, though, is that any of these range names are absolute references, and when I go back to the name manager, I'm going to remind you of that. So when you're going to copy any of these formulas, or if you want to copy any of these formulas that have range names in it, this is where you could run into a little bit of trouble, because when you copy over, you'll note that because it's an absolute reference, that range name January, when I'm copying, it's going to continue over into the next cell as that same range name. So that's something for you to note. I'm just going to undo here so that I do not have that same formula in each one of these columns. And if I want, I can choose auto sum yet again, and this time February comes up as the range name. So to quickly review, we learned how we can define range names by either using headings that are taken as the range names later, so we select that portion that contains those headings, and when we do that, we can choose create from selection, watch what checkbox is checked off here, and in this case top row, and when I return over here, you'll see that initial cost and current value has been added as some range names. Or I can take a certain portion of my spreadsheet and I can define that range as a singular range name, click in my name box and call it whatever I like, and once I do press enter, it retains that range name. Lastly, Name Manager manages our range names for us. We can edit an existing range name, so we can change the reference it's referring to. We could delete from here. And on your own time, if you like, you can experiment with filtering, because if you have a lot of range names, you might want to just filter out some range names and be specific to a certain worksheet.